You've heard of narcissists who crave attention, manipulate emotions, and can't stand being alone. But what if I told you the most dangerous one doesn't need anyone at all? No love, no friends, no validation, just pure self-sufficiency. Sounds powerful, right? It's not. It's terrifying. Because the narcissist who doesn't seek your approval can't be guilt, can't be reached, and definitely can't be stopped by normal boundaries. They aren't lonely. They've chosen detachment and weaponized it. And when society starts to admire that cold independence, that's when we're in real trouble. This isn't just about one person. It's a warning about a rising pattern. And the worst part, you may already know someone like this and not even realize it. So stay with me until the end, because the deeper we go, the more you'll start to see behind the mask. And if you've ever felt drained by someone who made you question your own heart, this might finally give you the answers you've been looking for. If it resonates, leave a comment and subscribe, because the truth we uncover here might just protect someone you love. What looks like confidence is often emotional detachment. A narcissist who claims they need no one has mastered the art of isolation as control, not strength. And that's the greatest myth society keeps feeding. The idea that needing no one is a badge of honor, a sign of ultimate power, independence, and self-mastery. But what if I told you this "I don't need anyone" mask isn't noble, it's dangerous? Because behind that carefully crafted image is someone who has shut down the very parts of themselves that make us human: vulnerability, connection, compassion. And when someone becomes emotionally untouchable, they also become morally unaccountable. That's when things stop being personal and start becoming destructive. Quietly, invisibly, and often irreversibly. This type of narcissist doesn't seek applause. They don't charm crowds like the textbook narcissist you read about. They are not loud. They are not theatrical. They are controlled, calculated, and most of all, detached. They don't beg for attention. They observe. They plan. They lead in silence. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. You can't see them coming. There's no obvious manipulation, just the slow unraveling of others around them, especially the ones who try to get close. Because when you try to love someone who feels nothing but superiority and needing no one, you start to believe you're the weak one for needing them. The world often celebrates this kind of person. We call them stoic, strong, independent. We admire how nothing seems to shake them. But strength without softness becomes ice. And when someone builds an entire identity around being untouched, unreachable, and unbothered, they don't just protect themselves from pain. They disconnect from empathy. And that's when they stop seeing people as people. Relationships become transactions. Conversations become power tests. Vulnerability becomes ammunition. To them, emotions are liabilities, not signs of life. So what happens when someone like this enters leadership? A workplace? A relationship? At first, it feels like control. Stability. A breath of fresh air. They seem so in command, so unfazed, so powerful. But time reveals something else. They lack compassion in crisis. They show no remorse in harm. And they disappear when emotional presence is needed the most. Because to them, needing someone is weakness. Admitting fault is weakness. Depending on love, the ultimate failure. And here's the twist. They don't just live this way. They influence others to do the same. If you spend long enough around someone like this, you'll begin to question your softness. You'll apologize for crying. You'll downplay your intuition. You'll shame your own need for connection. And slowly, the parts of you that made you beautifully human will feel like flaws. You'll begin to mirror them, not because you admire them, but because you're trying to survive around them. This is the emotional erosion no one talks about, the silent way narcissists transform their environment without a word. Not through chaos, but through coldness. They don't yell. They don't beg. They don't even argue. They just look at you with the kind of stillness that makes you feel like your emotions are overreactions. And that's how they win, not with force, but with freeze. They freeze the warmth out of a room, out of a team, out of a family. And over time, everyone walks on eggshells, not because they're afraid of violence, but because they are afraid of being dismissed, devalued, or emotionally exiled. This is how control works when it's cloaked in calm, when it's dressed up as wisdom, when it's applauded by others who confuse emotional detachment for emotional intelligence. But they are not the same. Emotional intelligence connects. Emotional detachment protects, but at the cost of everyone else's sanity. And in society, when this becomes the standard of success or leadership, we enter dangerous ground. Because now we're no longer rewarding empathy. We're rewarding emotional armor. Now here's the truly frightening part. The narcissist who doesn't need anyone doesn't need validation, so you can't manipulate them. They don't crave love, so you can't reach them. They don't care about connection, so you can't guilt them. There are no emotional pressure points. Nothing you can appeal to. You're not dealing with a wounded child hiding behind ego. You're dealing with someone who has turned the ego into a fortress and thrown away the key. That's not lonely. That's lethal. Especially if they're in charge of something or someone. These are the kinds of individuals who rise to positions of power and influence not by charming crowds, but by outlasting everyone. They seem rational, grounded, reliable. But once they're at the top, they strip away all softness. And because they've never needed anyone, they feel no accountability to the people beneath them. They'll make decisions that destroy lives without blinking. They'll silence dissent with quiet distance. And they'll leave others questioning their own emotions, because the narcissist themselves never displays any. It's not that they don't feel. It's that they believe emotions are for the weak. And if you show any, you've just lost the game. Now imagine being in a relationship with someone like this. You'll never fight over attention, but you'll also never be seen. You'll never be yelled at, but you'll never be emotionally held. They won't need you. And eventually, you'll start feeling like no one should. That's the residue they leave. The belief that needing people is a flaw. That vulnerability is weakness. That softness is something to outgrow. And that's the most dangerous lie of all. Because once we start believing it, we become a little more like them. We become colder, more distant. We raise kids to toughen up. We lead teams with pressure, not presence. We bury our wounds instead of healing them. And we tell ourselves we're just being strong. But strength without heart is just control. And control without compassion is destruction. Every emotionally healthy person has internal checkpoints. Moments when love softens their anger. When connection makes them pause before hurting someone. When empathy kicks in, saying, "Wait, how will this make them feel?" These are not signs of weakness. They are proof of humanity. Empathy isn't just a nice trait. It's a governor. A spiritual brake pedal. It slows down our worst impulses. It reminds us that we are not the center of the universe. It forces us to consider the emotional weight of our actions. But when someone consistently avoids real connection, when they strip away vulnerability, distance themselves from meaningful relationships, and dull their sensitivity to others' emotions, they remove that checkpoint altogether. And without that inner restraint, anything becomes possible. Cruelty becomes efficient. Control becomes routine. And the damage they cause no longer registers as harm. It becomes strategy. You see, true connection forces you to feel another person. Their sadness becomes heavy in your chest. Their joy lifts you. Their trust anchors you to accountability. But a narcissist who's mastered detachment has found a way to avoid that entire emotional cost. They won't let you in enough to form their connection, and they won't let themselves care enough to be slowed down by it. And that's where the danger begins. Because once someone stops feeling the weight of others' emotions, they can justify almost anything. Disrespect becomes discipline. Silence becomes wisdom. Betrayal becomes self-preservation. It's not that they don't understand pain. It's that they believe your pain doesn't matter. This isn't just manipulation. It's dehumanization. When connection is gone, people become objects, roles, functions. And you can control a function without guilt. You can discard a role without grief. You can use someone until they break, and call it strategy. That's what happens when empathy is removed from the equation. Every interaction becomes a calculation, not a connection. And the scariest part, many of these people are seen as strong leaders, visionaries, or highly focused. They are praised for being unaffected by emotions, applauded for making hard decisions without flinching. But what no one sees is the trail of emotional bodies left behind, souls who gave, trusted, and felt deeply, only to be discarded without acknowledgement or closure. In relationships, this kind of narcissist won't explode. They'll erode. Slowly. Consistently. They'll avoid intimacy, not with distance, but with control. They'll give you just enough warmth to keep you hoping, but never enough depth to feel safe. You'll be emotionally starving in their presence, confused why you feel lonely next to someone who's always there. But that's the trick. They are physically present, but emotionally unplugged. And every time you reach out, every time you cry, every time you ask for reassurance, it's like shouting into a vacuum. There's no connection, no checkpoint, just cold observation. When a narcissist refuses to be emotionally connected, they also refuse to be changed by love. And that's what makes them dangerous, not that they don't feel, but that they believe feeling is unnecessary. To them, emotions slow things down, make you vulnerable, get in the way. And when someone views love as a liability, they become capable of harming others with a clear conscience. That's not strength. That's spiritual decay. Because without empathy, success becomes conquest. Leadership becomes domination. Intimacy becomes control. Most people have a moment, right before they say something cruel, betray a friend, or act in anger, when their heart steps in and says, "Don't do it." That's empathy. That's the checkpoint. That moment of pause. It's sacred. It's what keeps families from shattering, relationships from collapsing, societies from turning brutal. But narcissists who don't want connection bypass that moment. They don't hear that voice. Or worse, they hear it and ignore it, because they've trained themselves to associate emotion with weakness. And when you practice that long enough, you stop seeing others as real. You become the only person in the story that matters. You might work beside someone like this, live with someone like this. You might even love someone like this. And no matter how deeply you feel, no matter how much heart you bring into the relationship, it will feel like you're carrying the connection alone. That's the true weight of it. You're not just sad. You're exhausted. Because you're doing the emotional labor for two people, and they don't even notice. Or worse, they mock it. Call it too much. Call you too emotional. But what they are really doing is rejecting accountability. Because if they acknowledged your pain, they'd have to face their own actions. And they won't. They've disconnected from that mirror a long time ago. This is how a narcissist who avoids connection becomes society's greatest threat. Not because they yell, scream, or demand attention, but because they are able to cause enormous harm without blinking. Because they don't stop decay. Because they've convinced themselves they don't need to. And once someone removes that internal checkpoint, the only thing standing between their decisions and destruction is you. That's why they gravitate toward people who do feel. Empaths. Chosen ones. The emotionally available. Because whether they admit it or not, they are drawn to your warmth, even as they reject it. But they will test it, exploit it, even resent it. Because in your love, they see everything they disconnected from. And to maintain their illusion of power, they'll try to convince you that your empathy is your weakness, that your need for connection makes you broken. But don't believe it. Your emotions are not liabilities, they're your superpower. Your capacity to feel deeply is not your flaw, it's your filter. It's what stops you from becoming like them. Because the moment we start praising people for not needing anyone, for feeling nothing, for being unshakable and untouchable, we're not moving forward. We're moving away from each other. And that is where civilizations collapse. Not through chaos, but through coldness. When people stop checking in with each other emotionally, the damage becomes invisible, but devastating. That's why connection matters. That's why empathy matters. Because without those checkpoints, we all become threats to one another. So the next time someone brags about not needing anyone, pay attention. The absence of need isn't always a sign of healing. Sometimes, it's the final symptom of a soul that's quietly disconnected from humanity, one decision at a time. There's a kind of power that doesn't demand the spotlight, but controls it. A kind that doesn't raise its voice, but rearranges entire rooms with just a glance. That's the kind of power the detached narcissist thrives on. They don't need constant attention. In fact, they often avoid it. They prefer to work in the shadows, slowly building influence not through charisma, but through intimidation wrapped in calm. They speak less, but when they do, people listen. Not because of wisdom, but because of the quiet fear they've instilled. Over time, their silence becomes a weapon, a tool, and eventually, a throne. You won't find them begging for approval. You won't catch them asking for help, because they've mastered the art of appearing invincible. And in a world that equates asking for help with weakness, that illusion of self-sufficiency becomes their greatest cover. They train others to believe they are untouchable, that they're above normal struggles, that they don't need what the rest of us do, support, correction, or accountability. And once people begin to believe that, the narcissist becomes immune. Immune to criticism, immune to consequences, immune to emotional responsibility. But don't mistake their silence for peace. It's not peace. It's power being curated, measured, monitored, and wielded carefully. This kind of narcissist doesn't throw tantrums. They don't need to. They've built a system where people bend around them, without ever being told to. It's all unspoken. That's how you know it's real. You walk into a room they're in, and suddenly everyone becomes quieter, more careful, more compliant. That's not respect. That's subconscious submission. And the narcissist didn't demand it. They designed it. They position themselves as the one person who has it all figured out. The one who never makes emotional decisions, never gets overwhelmed, never needs a hand. And people admire that. At first. But admiration slowly turns into silence. People stop speaking up around them. They stop questioning them. Why? Because no one wants to be the one who challenges the unshakable. That's how the narcissist wins. Not by silencing others with force, but by convincing them there's nothing to say, nothing to fix, nothing to question. Because, after all, they've got it all handled. And if you do dare to confront them, you'll feel it immediately. The wall. Not anger. Not denial. Something colder. The look that says, you've crossed a line. Suddenly, you become the unstable one. You become the emotional one. You become the problem. Because in their world, accountability isn't seen as growth. It's seen as threat. And any threat must be neutralized. Not always loudly, but definitely completely. The more power they gain, the more untouchable they feel. And the more untouchable they feel, the more dangerous they become. Because without accountability, there are no limits, no reality checks. No one's saying you went too far. Their ego becomes law. Their decisions become doctrine. Their opinions become unchallengeable truths. And the people around them, they either fall in line or fall apart. Now, here's the part most people miss. This kind of narcissist selects their environment. They're careful about who they keep close. They don't want strong voices around them. They want echoes. They don't want support that comes with truth. They want silence that comes with fear. And if you're someone who feels deeply, sees clearly, and speaks truthfully, they will either discard you or discredit you. Because the presence of real accountability is unbearable to someone who has built their identity on being above correction. They often end up in leadership, family, corporate, community, or spiritual. Not because they are the most qualified, but because they appear the most controlled, the least needy, the most efficient. But what no one sees is the emotional void behind that efficiency. The way they quietly manipulate people into submission by rewarding compliance and punishing resistance, not overtly, but psychologically. You won't even realize it's happening. You'll just notice that you speak a little less, that you doubt yourself a little more, that you feel off balance around them, but can't explain why. This is the long game they play. Not with fire, but with frost. And the worst part, they often get away with it for years. Because society loves the image of someone who doesn't need anything. We call them strong. We call them leaders. But strength without accountability becomes tyranny. And leadership without empathy becomes manipulation. The moment we stop questioning someone's actions just because they seem calm or always know what to do, we're not witnessing leadership, we're witnessing emotional dictatorship. Accountability doesn't make a person weak. It keeps them grounded. It keeps them human. The narcissist who avoids it isn't evolved. They're emotionally evasive. And that evasiveness turns toxic the moment they are given influence. Because once someone is allowed to lead without being questioned, they begin to believe they're incapable of being wrong. That's when the damage begins, not loudly, but deeply. So if you're around someone who never apologizes, never asks for help, never admits fault, don't mistake that for strength. Look deeper. Are people allowed to be honest with them? Is feedback welcome or feared? Do they empower others or silently control them? These are the signs. Because the person who needs no one might not be independent. They might be unchecked. Unchecked power is never harmless, especially when it wears the mask of peace. Because behind that mask is someone who believes the rules don't apply to them. And when the rules don't apply to someone, eventually, everyone around them pays the price. There's something undeniably magnetic about the lone wolf. The quiet strength, the calm presence, the way they seem to walk through life untouched by chaos, emotions, or the opinions of others. At first glance, it feels admirable, almost sacred. In a noisy world full of insecurity and oversharing, this person seems above it, above drama, above neediness, above vulnerability. But look closer, and you'll begin to see something else. That this calm isn't peace, it's distance. That this detachment isn't strength, it's a defense. And that the image of not needing anyone is not a reflection of freedom, but a strategy to avoid accountability. The truth is, when someone truly needs another person, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, they open a doorway, a sacred, vulnerable space where love, support, and yes, correction, can enter. Because when you need someone, you also make room for them to speak into your life, to reflect things back to you, to hold up a mirror. But the narcissistic lone wolf wants none of that. They don't want mirrors. They want admiration without intimacy, praise without proximity, loyalty without dialogue. Because if they were truly close to anyone, if they let anyone see behind the curtain, someone might notice the cracks in their facade. That's the real reason they push people away. It's not independence. It's insulation. If they need no one, then no one can question them. No one can hurt them. No one can tell them no. It's the perfect setup for control. Because connection, as beautiful as it is, always comes with accountability. And for them, that's a threat. So, they present this polished version of themselves, emotionally self-sufficient, intellectually superior, calm under pressure. They become the go-to person for others, always appearing stable, wise, unbothered. And people fall for it. They say things like, "I wish I could be like that. So focused, so unshakable." But what they're really admiring is the mask, not the person. And the narcissist knows it. In fact, they're counting on it. Because admiration from a distance is easier to control than intimacy up close. This is why they often choose roles of authority, leadership, or mentorship. Not because they want to serve, but because they want to shape how they are seen. And the lone wolf image gives them exactly that: mystery, reverence, and protection from real connection. They drop hints of past betrayal or trauma, but never enough to invite healing. They'll say things like, "I've learned to rely only on myself," or "people just don't get me." And in doing so, they flip the narrative. They are not avoiding intimacy. They've transcended it. They are not cold. They are just evolved. But don't be fooled. This is not growth. It's emotional evasion. They romanticize solitude. They build myths around it. They'll make you believe that needing someone is a weakness. That love is a distraction. That intimacy is for those who haven't mastered themselves yet. But watch closely, and you'll notice how they still expect loyalty, still expect admiration, still expect others to revolve around them. They don't give, but they demand. They don't open up, but they expect others to stay emotionally available. They live behind a wall, and then resent you for not climbing it fast enough. And if you do try to get close, if you try to reach into that emotionally armored space and offer real connection, you'll be met with subtle deflection, discomfort, or wise manipulation. They'll twist your vulnerability into a flaw, make your empathy feel like emotional neediness, and slowly, you'll start believing them. You'll start shrinking, second-guessing, apologizing for simply wanting closeness. And that's when they win. Because now, you've accepted the unspoken contract. They are the strong one, and you are the emotional one. They are in control, and you are lucky just to be near them. But here's the truth no one says aloud. No human being is truly independent. We are all wired for connection. Even the narcissist. Especially the narcissist. But the difference is, they fear it. Deep down, they associate connection with exposure. Because needing you would mean they could lose you. And that vulnerability terrifies them. So instead, they turn solitude into personality. They weaponize isolation. They make it look beautiful, admirable, enviable. But what you're admiring is their fear, dressed up as strength. And this is where the danger lies. Not just for you, but for everyone around them. Because the lone wolf doesn't just avoid accountability. They build systems that protect them from it. In relationships, this means emotional control. In workplaces, this means untouchable authority. In communities, this means quiet influence that goes unchallenged. And the longer this image goes unchecked, the more damage it causes. Because people stop questioning someone who seems above questioning. They stop offering connection to someone who claims to need none. And in that silence, the narcissist's power grows. So if you're around someone who never needs anything, never admits fault, never asks for help, ask yourself, is this strength, or is this a carefully constructed illusion? And more importantly, why are they so invested in keeping you emotionally at arm's length? Because needing someone is not a flaw. It's not a weakness. It's what keeps us human. It's what keeps us humble. And anyone who claims they don't need people at all isn't enlightened. They're avoiding the one thing that could ever truly change them, being seen. The lone wolf isn't dangerous because they walk alone. They're dangerous because they convince others that connection is weakness, while secretly feeding off the admiration and silence of those too intimidated to get close. And the longer they stay unchallenged, the more untouchable they become. But connection is not the enemy. It's the antidote. And anyone who truly walks in strength is never afraid to admit they need someone too. We live in a world that often confuses emotional numbness with strength. The less you react, the more mature you're seen. The quieter your pain, the wiser you appear. But this illusion is dangerous, especially when it becomes the very foundation of someone's identity. The emotionally detached narcissist has built their image around the idea of independence, untouched by drama, immune to heartbreak, above emotional chaos. But if you look closer, what they call peace is often just a well-crafted void. They haven't mastered emotional control. They've escaped emotional connection altogether. And while the world applauds them for their calm exterior, beneath that calm is emptiness masquerading as enlightenment. This is not emotional maturity. It's avoidance. There's a difference between choosing peace and shutting down. Maturity is when you feel everything but still choose your response. Numbness is when you feel nothing at all and call it wisdom. That's the trap. That's the lie they tell themselves and others. I'm not cold. I'm just focused. I'm not distant. I've just evolved. But real evolution doesn't eliminate empathy. It deepens it. And anyone who claims to have risen above emotion has actually just disconnected from the very thing that makes them human. The danger lies in how they present it. They don't seem toxic at first. In fact, they seem incredibly balanced, controlled, wise. They're the ones who stay composed during arguments, the ones who never cry, the ones who shrug off loss as a part of life. But this isn't balance, it's shutdown. They've locked their heart behind a door so thick, even they can't access it anymore. And then they praise themselves for not needing support, not reacting to pain, not forming attachments. But if you look closely, you'll realize their strength doesn't comfort others, it confuses them. Because when someone stops reacting to life altogether, Something has gone missing inside. And here's where it starts to affect the people closest to them. When you try to express an emotion, they don't meet you with empathy. They meet you with logic. When you're crying, they tell you what to do, not how to feel. When you're hurting, they act as if emotions are unnecessary distractions. And over time, you begin to silence yourself. You start apologizing for feeling too deeply. You start questioning your emotional needs. You wonder if maybe you are the problem for wanting connection. That's the invisible damage of someone who lives an emotional void but preaches independence. They don't just deny their feelings, they slowly erase yours. And this emotional erasure can feel subtle but devastating. Because you're not being yelled at. You're not being shamed directly. You're being ignored emotionally, brushed off, minimized. And it makes you start believing that emotions themselves are flaws. That feeling something strongly is a weakness. That needing comfort makes you unstable. This is how you lose yourself around them. Not through abuse, but through quiet emotional starvation. Not through chaos, but through constant stillness. They make the absence of emotion look like control, and they make your presence of emotion feel like a burden. What they don't tell you is this: they weren't born like this. Somewhere along the way, they learned to numb out. Maybe they were hurt. Maybe they were betrayed. Maybe they were once deeply emotional, but someone told them that feeling made them weak. And instead of healing, they shut down. They closed the door on their heart and then built an entire personality around keeping it locked. They told themselves emotions were liabilities, love was dangerous, and dependence was fatal. And to protect themselves from pain, they exiled every part of themselves that could ever feel it. And at first, this may have felt like growth. They became more productive, more in control, less reactive. People admired their composure, their stability. But over time, they became unreachable, untouchable, unchanged. Because what they didn't realize is this: when you cut off the lows, you also cut off the highs. When you stop feeling pain, you also stop feeling joy. When you avoid connection to avoid heartbreak, you end up heartless, not by nature, but by practice. And that kind of heartlessness is not power. It's paralysis. Real strength isn't found in emotional detachment. It's found in emotional integrity, in being able to sit with pain without running from it, in feeling deeply and still choosing kindness, in grieving, but still hoping, in being vulnerable and still standing. That's emotional independence. But the narcissist in emotional void doesn't want to be strong. They want to be safe. And so they trade humanity for control. But the price is high, because in the process of protecting themselves, they become a danger to everyone around them. They can no longer relate, no longer connect, no longer care in a way that changes them. So if you're with someone who never reacts, never cries, never shares their inner world, don't always assume they're grounded. They might be hiding. They might be empty. They might be confusing numbness with enlightenment. And if you find yourself slowly dimming your own emotions to match theirs, take a step back, because your emotions are not excessive. They're evidence that your heart is still alive, still working, still beating. And anyone who makes you feel ashamed of that is not strong. They're wounded, and they've mistaken their injury for evolution. They don't throw tantrums. They don't slam doors. They don't explode in rage or fall apart in tears. That would be too obvious, too emotional, too human. No, this kind of narcissist operates in silence. Their sabotage is quiet. Their manipulation is clean. They don't need to raise their voice because they've already trained everyone around them to listen carefully to every unspoken cue. Their power isn't in volume, it's in subtlety. And that's what makes them so difficult to expose. Because while everyone's watching for red flags, they're weaving invisible threads, controlling outcomes, shaping narratives, and draining people without ever making a scene. They smile while they isolate you. And that smile disarms you, makes you second-guess yourself. They won't tell you to stop crying, but they'll look at you like your tears are weakness. They won't say you're too much, but they'll go silent the moment you express a need. And slowly, you begin to regulate yourself around them. You shrink before they ask you to. You apologize for feeling things too deeply. You start questioning your intuition, your sensitivity, your entire emotional landscape. And while you're busy doubting yourself, they're quietly pulling away your emotional oxygen, bit by bit. This is how they sabotage, not through chaos, but through calm control. They subtly make your emotional world feel inconvenient. They shame vulnerability by pretending they're above it. You'll notice they never really celebrate you. But they also don't outright criticize. They just withhold. Praise, affection, attention, all rationed like tools, not gifts. And you feel it. Even if you can't name it. You start doing more to please them. Work harder to be enough. Try to be less emotional, less needy, more like them. And in doing so, you slowly betray yourself, thinking it's maturity. But it's not growth. It's survival. They sabotage your spirit while keeping their image clean. On the outside, they're kind, composed, above drama. Everyone thinks they're the stable one, the grounded one, the wise one. Meanwhile, you're unraveling in silence. Because when you try to talk about what's happening, you have nothing to point to. No outburst, no clear abuse, no proof. Just 1,000 tiny moments where you felt invisible, dismissed, or too much. And that's how they win. They create confusion. They destabilize you without ever breaking a rule. And the more confused you become, the more control they gain. They won't isolate you with threats. They'll isolate you by pretending to need space. By saying, I'm just focusing on myself. By gradually removing their emotional presence while maintaining their physical one, you'll find yourself alone, even when they're right next to you. You'll pour your heart out, only to be met with a distant nod. You'll cry, and they'll hand you logic. You'll ask for comfort, and they'll offer solutions. And somewhere in that emotional desert, you'll start thinking maybe the problem is you. But it isn't. It never was. They've simply created a dynamic where their emotional unavailability becomes the standard, and your emotional needs become the problem. And the worst part, they don't have to lift a finger to keep it that way. Their silence does the work. Their indifference speaks louder than words. And while you're breaking inside, they continue on as if nothing happened. Strong, centered, unaffected. This is the silent sabotage. The slow undoing of another person's spirit. Done not with abuse, but with absence. And if you try to leave, they won't beg. They'll act like they are unaffected. Like they always knew you were too sensitive or not aligned with their growth. They'll rewrite the story in a way that justifies their detachment. And you'll walk away carrying all the weight, all the shame, all the confusion, while they move on, untouched. That's how these narcissists operate. They don't create fires. They drain warmth. They don't explode. They evaporate. And by the time you realize how much of yourself you've lost around them, they've already found a new audience to admire their strength. But what they call strength isn't strength at all. It's strategy. It's survival. It's a cold system designed to protect the ego at all costs, even if it means slowly destroying the people who love them. They never had to scream to create damage. They just had to make you question your right to feel, to speak, to exist emotionally. And that's what makes them so hard to see, because they hide behind a mask of calm, and everyone loves the one who never makes drama. But you know better now. You've lived it. You felt it. At first, their independence feels admirable. You see someone who doesn't cling, doesn't beg, doesn't chase. Someone who moves through life untouched, unaffected. They don't call too much. They don't demand attention. They don't need anyone. And in a world flooded with codependency and emotional chaos, that kind of stillness looks like power. But soon, you realize something else. This isn't just emotional stability. It's emotional absence. This person doesn't just handle solitude. They weaponize it. They turn their lack of need into a wall so high, so cold, you can't climb it, reach it, or even knock on it. And worst of all, they like it that way, because the one who doesn't need anyone can't be touched by anyone, and that makes them untouchable in the most dangerous way. You can't guilt them into caring. You can't reason with them during conflict. You can't appeal to their empathy, because that part of them was discarded long ago. They chose isolation not as a healing season, but as a permanent shield. And now, every time you try to connect, you're met with that invisible wall. They say things like, "I don't have time for this," or "I just don't do emotions," or the classic, "That's a you problem." And slowly, you begin to realize you're alone. Not physically, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. This kind of isolation isn't just a personal habit. It's a control tactic. Because when someone doesn't need you, they become unpredictable. You never know where you stand. You can't find leverage. You can't find rhythm. You feel emotionally powerless, not because they are loud, but because they're indifferent. They don't threaten to leave, but they'll disappear for days with no explanation. They don't yell, but they won't respond either. And that kind of silence makes you question yourself. Did I do something wrong? Am I being too emotional? Do they even care? And that's the game. They've trained you to accept the absence as normal, to fear their detachment more than their disapproval. Because when someone doesn't need you at all, you end up doing all the work to stay connected. And that's exactly how they like it. They become the center of the emotional universe while doing the least to hold it together. You reach out. You apologize. You explain. You overextend. All while they watch, calm, distant, and in control. And the more effort you give, the less they offer in return. They hold their silence like a sword, their stillness like a throne. And they know that the less they react, the more unstable you'll feel. It's not that they don't understand how emotions work. They do. They just choose not to participate. Because participation would require vulnerability, accountability, presence. And they've long since decided those are weaknesses, not qualities. This is how isolation becomes a weapon. It's not just about being alone. It's about making others feel abandoned while still technically being there. It's the slow drip of emotional starvation, the quiet refusal to engage, the chilling distance in moments when connection is needed most. And because they never outright reject you, it's hard to call it what it is. It's not abuse in the traditional sense. It's absence with intention. And if you finally gather the courage to walk away, to stop trying, they won't fight. They'll let you go without blinking. Not because they are over it, but because admitting pain would make them human. And they've spent too long building a persona that feels nothing, needs nothing, regrets nothing. But don't mistake their coldness for peace. That isolation they weaponize, it costs them something, too. Because the truth is, no one is born needing nothing. That kind of detachment is built, brick by brick, wound by wound, betrayal by betrayal. They've turned their pain into armor and convinced themselves it's enlightenment. But deep down, they've exiled themselves from the very thing they crave. Real love, real connection, real transformation. They'll never admit it, because to admit that they need someone would be to surrender the control they worship. So they live on islands of their own making. Beautiful, dangerous islands where no one can hurt them and no one can reach them. And the longer they stay there, the more convinced they become that this is power. But what they call strength is actually sorrow frozen in time. It's humanity, locked away. And if they don't wake up, that cold silence will eventually swallow them whole. So if you're dealing with someone like this, remember, your need for connection is not a flaw. Your longing to be understood is not weakness. And your pain in their absence is not drama. It's truth. It's love trying to survive in a place it was never welcomed. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stop trying to melt the heart of someone who's chosen to live in ice. When most people hear the word narcissist, they imagine someone loud, flashy, arrogant, the show-off who never stops talking about themselves, the center of every room, the storm that you can see coming from a mile away. But those are the easy ones to spot, the surface-level players, the ones who feed on attention because they have no internal world. But the real danger, the one most people never see coming, that's the quiet narcissist, the calm one, the composed one, the one who never yells, never breaks, never admits, because they don't need to. Their power isn't in volume, it's in calculation. This narcissist doesn't throw tantrums. They plan moves. They don't need applause. They need control. And they get it not by demanding attention, but by mastering the atmosphere. They walk into a room and suddenly everyone gets quieter. Not out of respect, but out of tension. They speak softly, but their silence weighs more than words. You won't hear them insulting others. No, they just imply things. Withdraw energy. Disapprove with their eyes. They don't argue to win. They let you talk yourself into confusion. And by the time you realize you're being manipulated, it's already too late. This is the narcissist who operates in ice, not fire. Their presence doesn't burn, it freezes. They make you second-guess yourself not through insults, but through absence. Not by calling you dramatic, but by acting so unaffected that you start feeling like the problem. You'll never catch them in chaos. They move behind the scenes. Quietly, strategically. They smile while they isolate. They whisper while they sabotage. They nod while you unravel. And the worst part, people love them. They are seen as stable, grounded, such a rock. Because they don't lose control. They don't show weakness. But that's the trick. You're not witnessing peace. You're witnessing emotional armor. You're not watching maturity. You're watching suppression. And anyone who always looks composed isn't strong. They are closed. They've shut down the parts of themselves that feel, that connect, that care deeply. And instead of doing the inner work, they built a persona. One that's impossible to question, because it never visibly cracks. This is why they are the most dangerous kind. Because no one suspects them. Everyone thinks they are the healer, the mentor, stable one. And meanwhile, behind that controlled exterior, they are pulling strings. They are pushing people away. They're making decisions that drain others but benefit themselves. And they do it with such a calm face that even the victims question if anything wrong really happened. This kind of narcissist doesn't need chaos to destroy you. They just need time. Because their damage is subtle. Slow. It accumulates like fog, until one day, you realize you've lost yourself. You don't trust your emotions. You over-explain everything. You walk on eggshells, not because they are dangerous, but because they are so calm that your emotions feel explosive by comparison. And that contrast makes you feel like the unstable one. But the truth is, they've engineered that. They've trained you to believe that stillness means superiority. That detachment means wisdom. That needing someone makes you weak. And over time, you become emotionally smaller around them. More careful. More quiet. And they never had to raise their voice. They just had to stay cold. Because here's the secret. Control doesn't always look like domination. Sometimes it looks like silence, composure, sophistication. But when it's used to avoid empathy, dodge accountability, and maintain superiority, it becomes poison. There's a silent infection happening, and most people don't even know they've caught it. It starts with admiration. Someone sees the narcissist, calm, unshakable, emotionally unfazed, and thinks, I want to be like that. They don't see the cost. They only see the surface. And so they start to imitate. At first, it feels like protection, like wisdom. They start speaking less, feeling less, depending less. They start pulling back their emotions, learning to rise above, learning to not care. And they call it growth. But what they are actually learning is how to go numb. And the narcissist, they smile quietly, because that's exactly the lesson they've been teaching all along. You see, this kind of narcissist doesn't just destroy people. They reshape them. Their detachment, their emotional shutdown, their cold version of strength, it becomes contagious. Because humans are wired to mimic what we see, especially when we're vulnerable, especially when we're in pain. And when someone walks into our lives and makes emotional distance look like mastery, we start copying it. We stop crying. We stop reaching out. We stop being soft. We stop being real. And suddenly, we're not just protecting ourselves from pain. We're cutting ourselves off from everything that makes us human. This is how empathy dies. Not in a scream, but in a whisper. Not with violence, but with silence. Because when more and more people begin to mirror the emotionally detached, thinking that's what strength looks like, We start building a culture that punishes vulnerability, a culture where softness is weakness, where openness is shameful, where needing someone is embarrassing, and the ones who feel deeply, they start hiding, they stop speaking, they start adapting to survive. And in that silence, the world becomes a colder place. It happens in families, in workplaces, in friend groups. People stop showing up emotionally because they've been taught, subtly and repeatedly, that emotions are messy, that real strength is stoicism, that feeling less means living better. But it doesn't. It means you're not living fully at all. You're just surviving. And worse, you're teaching others to do the same. The narcissist doesn't have to say it aloud. Their entire presence becomes the lesson. Detach. Stay above. Don't need anyone. And the more they are admired, the more their emotional unavailability becomes the new standard. You'll hear people say, "He never gets emotional. He's so strong." Or, "She's always calm, so grounded." But behind that calm is a frozen heart. And now, others are freezing too. Just to feel worthy. Just to feel safe. Just to feel like they belong. And it's not just individuals who change, it's society. Slowly, entire communities begin to reward detachment. Men are told not to cry. Women are told not to need. Children are told to toughen up. And instead of raising humans with empathy and courage, we raise shells, trained to look strong, but terrified to feel. This is the legacy of the cold narcissist, a ripple effect of emotional shutdown that spreads quietly from person to person, generation to generation. Not because they shouted, not because they forced, but because they modeled numbness so convincingly. Others believed it was the only way to survive. And the more people who adopt that belief, the less space there is for real connection, for real healing, for real love. Because love requires risk. Connection requires need. Empathy requires presence. And the emotionally detached narcissist gives none of that, yet tricks the world into believing they're the ideal. And in chasing that ideal, people don't just lose relationships, they lose themselves. So if you find yourself pulling back from your own feelings, ask why. If you find yourself uncomfortable with emotion, suspicious of connection, or ashamed of needing anyone, look again. Is that really growth? Or is that someone else's trauma, taught to you as wisdom? Because real strength isn't cold. Real power isn't numb. And real evolution isn't detachment. It's deeper presence. And anyone who teaches otherwise is leading people further away from their humanity. We live in a world that worships the image of strength, but it's a very specific kind. Not the kind that bends without breaking. Not the kind that holds space for others. No, the kind of strength that gets rewarded today is cold, polished, and untouchable. The kind that doesn't cry, doesn't ask for help, doesn't feel too much. We applaud people who never complain, who carry their weight in silence, who don't need anyone. We call it maturity. We call it power. But beneath that applause, something dangerous grows. And the narcissist knows exactly how to exploit it. Because they've studied what the world respects. They've watched how people respond to detachment, to control, to emotional silence wrapped in charisma. And so they shapeshift. They build a mask that fits the mold perfectly. They never show weakness. They speak with quiet authority. They act self-contained, as if they've transcended all human emotion. And society eats it up. Labels like high value, alpha, boss, or stoic leader are handed to them like trophies. No one stops to ask what's behind the mask, because the mask is too shiny, too socially acceptable, too admired. This is how they rise. Not by building real trust or offering empathy, but by becoming exactly what society rewards. They walk into rooms and command attention without effort. They become the ones others look up to, seek advice from, quote in motivational speeches. But the truth is, they are not leading with wisdom. They are leading with a curated version of themselves, one that never needs, never cracks, and never connects. We're used to spotting danger by the cracks, the outbursts, the breakdowns, the messiness. We're taught that harmful people eventually reveal themselves, through anger, through drama, through some visible moment of failure. But this type of narcissist doesn't break. They don't unravel. They don't give you a warning. And that's exactly why they are so dangerous. They are clean, controlled, polished. Everything harmful about them is hidden behind the mask of perfection. You never see their chaos, because they've buried it so deep even they've stopped acknowledging it. And by the time you start to feel that something is off, it's too late. You're already emotionally invested, confused, and doubting your own instincts. Because they don't come with sirens. They come with stillness. You never hear them scream. You never see them beg. They don't demand, they drain. Quietly, strategically. They use your emotions against you while never showing their own. And that's the terrifying part. They never give you the usual signs of danger. They don't lose control in public. They don't fall apart. They don't even argue much. Their power is in how unbothered they seem. And that calm exterior makes you second-guess every red flag, every gut feeling, every emotional shift you sense. By the time you realize something's wrong, you're already entangled. You've already shared your story with them. You've leaned on them. You've trusted their silence as safety. But what you were trusting wasn't peace. It was a lack of access. You didn't really know them. You knew the version they presented. And that version was built to disarm you, not to connect with you. They never told you they needed anything. They never asked for help. They seemed so strong, so evolved, so wise. But all of that was by design, because if they did show weakness, you might see their humanity. And if you saw their humanity, you might challenge their control. So instead, they remain flawless. And that flawlessness becomes the very thing that traps people. Because how can someone so stable, so calm, so together possibly be dangerous? You assume you're the unstable one. You start adjusting, apologizing, explaining. You blame yourself for the confusion. And meanwhile, they are doing what they always do. Staying silent, staying strong, and letting you fall deeper into the illusion they built. This is how they move through life without ever being held accountable. They don't slip up. They don't explode. They don't give anyone an obvious reason to walk away. And the people who do walk away, they are often too emotionally drained to explain why. All they know is that something was wrong, but they can't name it. And that's how the cycle continues. The narcissist walks away untouched, unexposed, while others leave carrying the confusion, the shame, the aftermath. Because when someone shows no weakness, they also show no entry point. You can't reach them. You can't warn others. You can't heal what you can't see. And this is how people stay stuck, trying to decode a person who never gives them anything to work with. No emotion, no vulnerability, no truth. But here's what no one tells you. People who never show weakness aren't strong, they are closed. And people who never crack, they've just built walls too high for even light to get in. And while the world admires them for being so put together, the people closest to them are quietly suffering in their shadow, feeling small, confused, and emotionally erased. So if you're waiting for a sign, an outburst, a mistake, a moment where they finally show their hand, stop. It may never come. Because this kind of narcissist doesn't self-destruct loudly. They destroy in silence. And by the time anyone notices, they've already taken too much from the people who got too close. If you are someone who feels deeply, someone who listens with their heart, someone who sees the good in people, even when they don't deserve it, then you've likely already crossed paths with this type of narcissist. Maybe more than once. You didn't attract them because you were weak. You attracted them because you were light. And light always draws attention, even from those who secretly resent it. These silent, emotionally detached narcissists are often drawn to people who carry warmth, empathy, and truth. Not because they want to be healed, but because they want to control what they don't understand. You, the chosen one, are their opposite, and their greatest threat. Your presence exposes them. Not because you attack them, but because your emotional honesty shines a light on their emotional emptiness. You love fully. They detach strategically. You offer connection. They keep score. You try to understand them. They try to study you. And what begins as admiration quickly turns into manipulation. They'll mirror your compassion at first, reflect your softness back to you, make you feel seen, until you trust them. And once you do, the shift begins. Your empathy becomes their testing ground. Your boundaries become their playground. Your loyalty becomes their leash. They will push you to see how far your compassion can stretch, how much silence you can tolerate, how many dismissive comments you'll excuse. And when you finally react, when you finally cry, question, or plead, they'll twist the story. They'll point to your emotion as the problem. They'll call you unstable, overdramatic, sensitive. Suddenly, the person who gave everything is framed as the one who asked for too much. And they'll play it so calm, so detached, that others might even believe them. But you'll know. Deep down, you'll feel it. You'll feel how your warmth was used against you, how your trust was turned into ammunition, how your emotional depth became their tool for power. And it will hurt, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the gaslighting. Because now, your pain is being labeled as weakness, your truth is being labeled as instability, and your love is being labeled as foolish. This is why chosen ones are often targeted, because you represent everything they have suppressed: emotion, connection, conscience, and soul. Being around you reminds them of everything they've locked away. And instead of healing, they attack. Instead of softening, they harden further. They test you, not to understand you, but to dismantle you. And once your spirit starts to break, they wear their detachment like a badge of honor. See, look how emotional they are. I'm just being calm. But let me say this clearly. Your emotions are not instability. They are signals of truth. They are echoes of your soul refusing to be erased. And your compassion isn't weakness. It's power. The fact that you still care, even after being twisted and tested, proves that your light hasn't been extinguished. So if you've been targeted by this type, understand this. It was never because you lacked value. It was because you carried too much of it. You saw too much. You loved too honestly. You held too much presence in a world full of performers. And people who thrive in emotional voids will always be threatened by people who bring depth, color, and realness.